Yeah, we got a good turnout. Awesome. Hey, Kathleen.
I don't have the software, but I'm very interested.
Well, I highly recommend downloading it and playing with it. Veronica has been doing some awesome, just having some space here for folks to share tips and tricks, and that's been really valuable. And Procreate is great just as an illustration app, but they added animation functionality a little bit ago, and it just gets better and better, and it's so easy and immediate. That's why I'm really excited about it. And I think that you'll have fun playing, and I'm going to share some ways that you can just get in and play in a really juicy way today. I think you'll be able, it's pretty easy, you'll be able to pick it up even without having the app. I think we've got screen share figured out. We'll check it, Veronica. And that it's recorded, so you'll be able to follow along. It's actually very, very simple, but the results that you can get are really rich. Veronica, did you want me just to launch, or did you want to say, I didn't want to butt in on you here?
No. I know you mentioned in one of your posts that people should have a reference photo of themselves. You're going to be showing basically like a self-portrait type animation.
Right, yeah, exactly. So the little tutorial that I put together is a fun way in. I've been posting my little motion self-portraits on Instagram for a few days, sharing this, this little technique that we're going to be playing with today. And if you have a reference photo, a self-portrait, or a portrait of someone else that you want to work with, have that ready. If you've got Procreate, the most recent version is always going to have the best speed and functionality. So bring up your Procreate in iPad, and I'm working in Procreate, and I have an Apple Pencil that makes things really nice and easy too. And so, Veronica, I'm going to see if I can screen share from the iPad.
Great.
And then we'll cross our fingers. All right, that looks promising to me. Aha! All right, we're in Procreate. Great, and can everyone still hear me okay?
We're good. I can hear you.
You can? Okay, great. Thank you for bearing with me as I figure out my multiple screens here. So I am going to encourage you just to launch in as I ramble. If you're playing along on the iPad, it'll be really participatory. We're just going to start a file and kind of learn. But I'll give you just a quick intro to who I am. I've been animating as my primary medium for about 13 years. I went to the School of the Museum of Fine Arts to study animation and film, where I produced my first independent animation entirely hand-drawn on paper using a completely traditional technique. That the schooling in that program was really traditional and or really radical. My background is in experimental theater, and I went from experimental theater into experimental animation. But I learned with traditional techniques before getting into anything digital. And one of my primary mentors is a gentleman named Flip Johnson, who was one of the first animators that was creating those crazy animated bumpers for MTV when MTV first launched. Do you remember their like wild stop motion things and like crazy 80s animations? Flip did 90% of those. If you're around my age, if you're born in the late 70s or early 80s, those were really formative for me. So I learned from an alternative animator traditional animation techniques, and now I translate them to Procreate. And you can too. So that's just a little bit about me. So I'm assuming if you have Procreate, you're already familiar with the layers functionality. It's a design, draw on your iPad app, and you're working in layers. And the animation functionality turns your layers quite simply into frames, and it translates your layers menu into a timeline across the bottom. So I'm going to show you first the file. I'm sharing my screen here, put that back in motion for you. I'll show you I'll dissect this for you, and then we'll just launch right in and start our own once you just kind of see the basics here. So let me make sure I've got this framed up for you. So this is my last moving portrait. And I'm going to pause it here. And I'm going to show you that I only have 7 frames in this animation, and it is looping. And each frame, as you can see over here, is a layer. I've named them frame 1, frame 2, frame 3 for you guys just to see. I actually am very sloppy usually about naming my layers, but it's a really good habit when you're doing any kind of digital design. But what you can see here is that each layer, anything that appears as a layer, is going to appear as a frame across your timeline. And what you can also see is that you can group your layers. So this enables you to create in a piece-by-piece fashion so that you can layer stuff up even across a timeline. So this animation was 7 frames and a foreground layer and a background layer, and I used a simple photograph. So let's just start a file together. And these are really fun to use as your backgrounds for Zoom. And the best fit is for your dimensions is going to be 1080p, 1080 by 1920 by 1080 pixels. And that's what I've set up here. If you're planning on sharing to Instagram and you're maybe planning to share it to your stories, but you also want it to go in your main timeline, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the cropping headache that social media, creates for us. With these, just to note on that, each of these that I've done, I have created them at 1920 by 1080, so that's kind of current cinema format. It's also the Zoom format, but I've kept my subject in the center. That way when I'm doing extreme crops, like for stories or whatever, I've got interesting content. You can't always plan your content to social media, but because these are sketches, that's what I've done. I can't really see reactions and stuff from folks. So can you hear me? We're going at it good. Right on, right on. Okay, do you guys have your iPads out? Whoever's playing along and you ready to pop up import a background photo for yourself or a reference photo? So what I've done here, all I've done is imported by going over to my little wrench saying add, and I've inserted a photo. I took just a bunch of reference photos of myself one day and have been playing with all of them. I tried to take theatrical stuff that would be fun and that had nice light and darks because I have been really inspired by watching everyone pull out their white paint value studies and then do glazes over them with color, doing your niche techniques. So I've been playing with that with my animation. I'm gonna pop back over here. So what we've done, let it load, brought in our reference photo, and anything that you have as your bottommost layer, you can click on, and you can say, I'd like to make this my background layer, or I'd like to make this my reference. If you're already using that, you'll see exactly how this technique works. What I'm gonna do is give myself some frames. So, oh, excuse me, let's actually set up here. Let's actually
What
set
size
up.
did you say was that? Sorry. If
Yeah,
you're
no problem.
If we're gonna add new canvas, should we do a custom size?
Yeah.
Or?
So I go by pixel and I go 1920 wide by 1080 high. And that's your 1080p, that's your standard current cinema standard, and it's the closest fit to the Zoom window, though it's not actually exact. Coincidentally, those are also the same dimensions of an Instagram story, but those are vertical. So you can also design in 1080p, but vertically if you want to design something that's specific for your stories. There's all this data that I keep reading about how motion is the thing that is literally catching people's eye in social media, that to even have just simple or subtle motion elements has some kind of crazy high rate of engagement compared to static imagery. And there are a lot of apps that do animating things for you, but to be able to simply do your own is pretty rad. So are you thumbs up on having your file set up, and we can keep going?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you make it a background layer again?
Great. I'll show you here. So all I've done is import. So let's just, whoops. I'm getting confused between which screen I'm working on. I keep trying to touch my laptop and then it's all confusing. Okay, so I'm gonna go back up into my little wrench for actions. I'm gonna click on Canvas. And this is where you're telling Procreate to stop thinking about your piece as just an illustration and you're saying, I want this to be an animation and I'd like it to be on a timeline. You're clicking Animation Assist on. And you'll note that it pops up a timeline along the bottom of your screen. And right now, it's just showing the default background color because we still have the white turned on. That's just how the piece loaded. And I only have one layer, so I only have one frame shown at the bottom. So once that menu pops up on the bottom, you're not really gonna notice a whole lot about it until we start adding frames. So up in your layers in the upper right, let's just pop in a couple blank frames. So a great thing to know about the translation between your layers in Procreate to your frames is that it's gonna read from bottom to top. So your very bottommost layer is gonna be eligible as a background layer. You can tap on it either in the layers column. Wait, is that true? Here we go. Okay, so you can tap on it down at the bottom, directly onto the tile in the timeline. And it brings up frame options for you. If you toggle on background, what it will do is it will hold that image static, and then any illustration that happens on layers above it will rotate through the timeline, and that background layer will just stay constant underneath them. Trust me, we're gonna find that out in a minute. So do that. Make your reference photo your background. For now, we're gonna take that out later. That's how I created all of these other ones.
Lisette, we're just a tad fast. Is there any way we can just walk through that one last time?
Absolutely. No, thank you for pausing. You just let me know if anything isn't clear. So we've got our reference photo pulled in. It would have to be your bottommost layer above the automatic background color, what is here white on mine. That's their automatic in Procreate. You could set it to whatever you want, and I'm probably gonna want a dark background because I'm doing these value studies. I'm just gonna switch my background color to black. I've got my reference photo here now. If I tap on it on the bottom, it gives me frame options, including hold duration, duplicate, and delete. Right now, all we're gonna do is toggle on background. It will only give the background option to whatever, and I'll show that to you again. Tapping on it in the timeline brings up frame options. The bottommost option on that is background toggle. Great. Thumbs up on that.
I think I'm still trying to get to turn it into an animation. Where was that setting again?
Oh, no problem, no problem.
I'm so sorry to hold everyone up too.
Not at all, not at all. I really appreciate. Up in your next to gallery, the little wrench tool here, it brings up your actions. And there's add, canvas, share, At the top, you're gonna go to canvas. Gives you the option to crop and resize, animation assist, drawing guide. We're turning on animation assist.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And it's, you good? You got that? Awesome. Yay. Thank you guys for, slow me down whenever. I apologize because I don't have the gallery view up. I'm not getting everyone's reactions in real time here, so I'm trying to check in with y'all.
I have a question too. I'm wondering if anyone else is working on just a basic iPad versus iPad Pro, because I don't have the animation assist option, but maybe I just haven't updated my software recently enough.
Right. So it's possible if your iPad is old enough that it actually might not support the current version of Procreate, because it does have a lot more, it needs a lot more crunching power. Okay. Really good question. Or it could be that you haven't updated.
Okay, cool. I'm going to follow along anyways, but yeah, good to know.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. So I was saying that I'm using the basic version of the iPad, and it does have the animation, but then it came out this year, but it's the basic iPad and it does have the animation assist. So I think you might want to check if you've updated your Procreate.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm gonna check my software update now.
Perfect, perfect. Yeah, it involves quite a bit of data. You might have to dump data if you need more space because it's definitely a larger app now than it used to be.
Okay.
Does anyone else have anything before we continue on here and add our next frame? Okay, cool. So this is where it gets really fun. So animation, there's this concept that's called the persistence of vision. And it's this concept that I find truly magical. And it's that thing that is like sort of remotely similar images played quickly in front of the human eye. The human eye magically creates motion. And you can actually have pretty loose, pretty different, pretty funky illustrations layered, playing across a timeline, and the eye will read it as a unified image. And that's what's pretty magical about this. And what I invite you to keep in mind is we are essentially going to do some speed drawing in layers, but then we're going to be able to play those layers across our timeline. So we've got animation assist on. Oops. We've got animation assist on. We've got our timeline across the bottom, and I prepped a few layers for myself so I can just easily hop into them. Remember that your animation is going to play from the bottom up, so whatever is in your next layer above is going to come next. Here's what I invite you to do. I'm going to limit my palette. What I did for this, the last animation that I shared with you, was I used white. And I selected just the airbrush on soft brush, and I pulled down my opacity a bit. This gives you a really kind of basic, you can get kind of super bright whites if you do a little layering, or you can get kind of fuzzy. You could do this with any color, but just for the purpose of the timing of this tutorial, stick with one color for this that you might consider a highlight color, because we're gonna go in and pick out highlights quickly across on a new layer referencing our photo. And then you can see as we build these, we're going to do them quickly for the purpose of the magic of persistence of vision, and so that you can see really quickly and get into the meat of how the animation works once you've actually got some drawing on some frames. So go into the layer that is above your reference photo. And again, whenever you're working digitally, you're always checking that you're on the right layer. So there are so many times that it's so possible to go in on your reference photo. We've all been there. So I'm going to go in above my reference photo. I've got a sort of a slight translucency, and I'm going to quickly pick out some highlights without being very precious. And I'm just finding, I'm kind of just shifting the size as I go. I'm just finding some highlights. And this is a really great exercise in just kind of training your eye to find what's important. Are you able to kind of see that? We're just playing on that first layer, and you can scribble, you can use really fine line, you can use a combination, and see what happens, because the eye is going to blend everything in a really radical, amazing way. And because we're working right over a photo, you get this like fabulous likeness with very little information. And yet, because it goes into motion, you like learn something about the form in a way that you really don't see when something is static. Okay, so I think, yeah.
So sorry, I just want to check with you, what brush did you select?
Oh yeah, so I'm working with, I think this is one of the basic preloads in Procreate, airbrush, soft brush.
Cool.
It's a nice, even, airbrushy, without spatter. Has a great pressure sensitivity so that you can get some good translucency and some opacity. But literally, you could use anything for this, or you could even change your tool for each layer.
Thank you.
But so you can see how much I've picked out of the image here, and I'm going to turn off my background layer so you can see how little is there. This is frame 1. I'm going to go to frame 2. So if you've hit about this much information on your highlights and you've challenged yourself just to go fast and be free and get freaky, follow along and go on to the next layer. Now, I'm going to keep my background layer on, This is my reference. And for this purpose, I'm going to toggle off the visibility on the layer that I just drew. I don't want to see it, but there are, right now I don't want to look at it, but there are more controls for this down in your timeline, in your animation timeline settings, down here. When you start drawing more frames, you get into choosing what your onion skin frames are doing. Onion skin basically means the translucency of the frames preceding and following the frame that is currently selected, the frame or layer that's currently selected. You don't have to play with that right now. Once you have an animation up and running, you have a few frames, you'll be able to play with all that functionality and it will make much more sense. So I'm going to continue unless anyone has any questions pop in. I'm going to speed draw with about the same speed highlights on a few more layers and be kind of unprecious about it and sloppy. So you can see here, persistence of vision and action and picking out highlights that I think might be important later on. And not getting too precious. Anything that you can do in a layer, illustrating in Procreate, you can translate into your animation. So grouping all of the effects and like multipliers and screens and stuff like that can all apply. So you can really start to layer after you get these basics figured out. So again, there's my second frame. And now that I've got 2 frames, actually, I can hit play on the bottom. All you need are 2 frames and it'll start to show you what's coming through. So as soon as you have a couple frames, just discover what it looks like. Don't have to dwell on it too long. I encourage you to challenge yourself to quickly go through and draw at least 5 of these highlight layers. That's what I'm going to be doing. And again, I'm just toggling off the highlight layers that I've already done, the first one and the second one, so that they're not complicating my view of my reference photo. And so that you can see something interesting about using different tools, I'll choose another random tool and just show you what it looks like when you're kind of mixing and blending. So I'm going in with a random, I think this said calligraphy, but I'm picking out the same highlights and I'm using the same color. Because of the persistence of vision and the willingness of your mind to make meaning out of disparate information, this disparate information that you're feeding it is going to be translated as, yes, motion, but motion really starts to translate into emotion. And I think one of the really cool things about these motion portraits is you can convey something with a bit of a tremble that just doesn't exist in static imagery. And what this technique is called in animation is this is a simmer. Essentially what we're creating is a simmer where you're using at least 3 frames that are kind of drawn over roughly the same, but with a little bit of wiggle. And it creates a sort of a static aliveness. And I am a really big fan of loops and kind of vibiness. And I love the effect of just a simmering, pulsing little bit. So how's it going? Do you guys have a few layers? I'm starting my 5th layer of highlight now, just if you're playing along with the speed. How are you doing, Anya?
I have a quick question. On my layers, one says frame, it says background, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, now frame 2, and I'm not seeing anything down here in my little like play situation.
So let's see. If you turn off the visibility of a layer, it will disappear from your frames. So visibility will have to be on for them to show up down there. Anything that's grouped is only going to show up as one frame in the bottom. How many layers do you have?
Okay, I just saw it doing a little animation. I have 3 layers. So I'll keep adding layers, but what about this frame? Is that frame a new layer?
I wish I could see. Here, give me a second if I can. Let me see if I can pin you up. You know, I can't see it.
It's okay. I hate to like take up everybody else's time too. I'm just in my layers menu. It says, you know, backgrounds at the very bottom, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, and then it says frame 2. And that was confusing me why it wasn't, is that frame a layer?
No. So, you know what you probably did is you may have added a frame down in the timeline, which is another way that you can do
Oh,
it.
I did do that.
Yes. So there you go. I find this to be a very bizarre function, the way that they gave you 2 different options of how to add them and that it names them differently. I'm sure there was some logic there that I'm not privy to. But yes, it does allow you to add a frame. And what that lets you do is if you're scrubbing through, that is scanning back and forth along your timeline down below here, I'll wake up my frame. So if you're scrubbing, which is scanning through your layers down below, you can stop at any frame as you're watching it in time. You can stop and say, oh, you know what? I'm missing a frame in between. And hit add frame, it will insert that right there in the timeline. It will also be reflected in your layers at the same level in the layers, but it's confusing that you can add it 2 ways with different language.
Yeah, perfect, thank you.
Yeah, you bet, you bet. So let's see. All right, I'm gonna do my last highlight layer and then I'm gonna show you about foreground and background and then how we can start to have fun with this.
I just want to ask one more question quickly. Did
Of
you
course.
keep the same brush, but just change the settings, or did you change brushes along the way?
I've been changing brushes, yeah,
Okay.
to try to, let's see here. There we go. Yeah, just to kind of get some variety and show you how kind of imprecise you really need to be to create this effect. You really don't have to be that that exact at all. And in fact, you can invite a ton of variation and the eye will just stitch stuff together and it's really exciting. So I'll show you what it looks like here with my stuff. Okay. So this is just 5 frames of just highlight. Does everyone have a few frames so that you can learn about the next functionality and then go back to where you're drawing? Does that feel good? Yeah, okay, right on, right on. So let's see here. All right, so I've just got highlight layers. I'm working just in white and they're rotating, they're looping through time. I've got all of the kind of meat that I actually need to create this simmer. Now what I'm gonna do is pull in some detail and some finesse, and I'm gonna do that on a background or on a foreground layer. So I'm gonna show you how this cool function is done, and then you can see how something that looks kind of weird and crummy like this turns into a piece that has some shape and form. And I'll show you this step of this process in my other project. So I went from reference photo, all right. So what you'll see here in my other project, again, I have my reference photo that I worked over, and then each group that you see I've labeled as frame myself. I actually took the time and was not a lazy designer and named them frame 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 in the order that they'll play. And you'll see at the very top of my layers, it says foreground highlight. I named it that. This would just be another layer. So you can add a layer at the top of your layers list. In layers, hit plus, go to the top. It didn't put mine at the top because I've already designated this as the top one. Let's see here. I'll toggle this off so you can see. So you can add a layer at the very top. And then if you tap on it in your timeline down at the bottom, it gives you the option, because it's in the very topmost slot in your layers, or the very right-hand most in your timeline. In frame options, when you tap on it down below in the timeline, it gives you the option to select foreground instead of background. Foreground creates a layer that is static and locked, that sits above all of the motion that's simmering underneath. So what you're looking at here is my foreground layer of this animation. And so without it, this is what the animation looked like. So you can kind of see this was like my value study. There isn't a whole lot of form going on. But I picked up, I got to designate that as foreground. There we go. There we go. And I locked in a copy of my foreground as my background, and all of a sudden I have a ton of definition that's staying static, that's giving a lot more detail and information, and punching some of those highlights that I wanted to really define this character, and those aren't moving. So that's how foreground and background works functionally after you've done just some like kind of value study stuff. Create a top layer. Anything that you draw in it, after you say this top layer is foreground, after you select it as foreground in the timeline, that top layer will stay static. And so you can play with that. I would say, if you wanted to do it the way I did it here, make it just a more detailed outline. You can copy it and now place it as your background. To place anything as your background, you've got, right now, you have your reference photo as your background. You have to go to the timeline, deselect that background. Anything that is currently background needs to be deselected, and then you need to move it up from the bottommost position. Procreate won't recognize any ability to create background or foreground unless they're in the bottommost or uppermost spot in your timeline or / layers. Is that making sense? Cool, cool. I'm really excited to see what you all make with this too. I'm gonna pop back to, so I'll show you, so that's foreground and background. I'm gonna pop back to my other one and do just what I said here, which is go to my top layer, create an additional layer. Down in my timeline, I'm gonna say this is now my foreground. I know that anything in foreground isn't gonna move. Everything is gonna simmer underneath it, but the foreground is gonna stay locked. Bring up my reference photo. Again, I don't really need this extra info, yeah.
Sorry, would you recommend using the same color or a different color for this?
I recommend just going nuts with this, because you're gonna learn more by trying just playing with this. Anything you do is gonna be really cool. Why would my Apple Pencil be low? There we go. All right, neat. It looks like I'm finger drawing for this part. Great, so. I'm gonna go in with the same color because I'm still working with that fun like niche, like digital niche thing I'm trying to do. And a pen I love to play with is the light pen. It's found in the brush library under Luminance. Light pen, I get so much mileage out of. You can get these really cool kind of light flares with pressure sensitivity, and it just does this fun kind of blown out fantasy look. So I'm gonna make my top layer with light pen, and I'm gonna make my top layer just maybe a contour line. That's essentially what I did in the last piece. So you can see what it's like then to have the combination of a static contour and just wildly moving texture in the same image. It's a really cool effect. I think a lot of people feel scared of animation in my experience because they think like, you know, I have no idea how to like make Mickey Mouse walk, or, you know, thinking of more like kind of classic animation concepts and being like, I don't know, it seems like a lot of laborious work, and or I have no idea how a walk cycle is achieved or whatever. And I think with this, particularly with the accessibility of this digital technology that so many of us already have at home, learning that there are so many different ways to create mood and emotion and magic really simply, like without any kind of super special understanding, quote unquote, of how animation is supposed to work, you can discover just like incredible new ways to show vibe. And that's really why I fell in love with animation in the first place. So I've created just a really basic foreground layer, and I've designated it as foreground. And so I'm just going to test and see how that changes things. Neat. Neat. It's a quick contour line just drawn with my finger because my Apple Pencil is charging for a second. But you're starting to get the idea. How is it coming? Are you guys discovering neat motion? Once you've got a few frames and you're playing with it, you can really play with the emotion and the impact of your moving image by now changing some of your settings that are found down in the timeline. Right now, my image is playing at 15 frames per second. This is where animation becomes a little bit of math. It's pretty simple conversion. It's just frames per second. So right now, my animation has 5 frames and it's playing 15 frames per second. So each of my drawings is looping through 3 times. However, you can change your frames per second and it radically alters the feel. And so I can bring my frames per second all the way down to say 6 frames per second. It's going to be really stilted, slow, pulsing if you're looking for a pulse, a more of a sort of an old school storybook vibe. Or I can take my frames per second. They allow you to go all the way up to 60 frames per second. In fact, on Zoom, I don't think it even really registers all of those frames. I don't think you're catching all of them because it's way too high for our screens. Classic film is 24 frames per second. That's what you're looking at there. Oftentimes, I will work at 12 frames per second, and I will just double each frame. I can share that with you too. It's a next layer of functionality that happens down in the timeline. Ways to play with your speed. If I pause this, while you all are working, I'll just prattle on about this little function. I can tap on any of the frames down in my timeline, and it will show me frame options. And the first is hold duration, and then below it, it says duplicate or delete. Hold duration is essentially duplicating a frame. Once you change your hold duration from none to 1, you'll see in the timeline down below that it has duplicated it, but it's in a slightly grayed out way. You can do that. It will do it for each individual frame. Hold duration 1, hold duration 1, hold duration 1. I'll do that for all of my frames. You can play with this, but playing it at the same frames per second, it slows down the animation, again, because of math. So oftentimes when I'm animating, when I'm doing personal work, I like a filmic kind of a quality. I like that 24 frames per second look, but I don't like to draw 24 individual frames. So I will draw 12 frames and then I will duplicate each of them. I just completed a piece for a client using that same method. So the output was 24 frames per second, but I was only drawing 12 individual frames. There's a lot of fun that can be had kind of messing around with the math here. So I encourage you to play with it.
Wow, this is so cool.
Are you discovering cool stuff?
Yeah, this is awesome.
Yes. Yay!
Deep rabbit hole with this.
Yes, I know. I was like, what can we do in such a short amount of time that will like open up the possibilities for you and get you like in there tinkering with it? Because obviously there's like so much that you can explore with this. And I can share with you, I've done like a digital like cut paper technique that you can do as an illustrator in iPad. I just used to complete an entire animation for a client. I did a 10-minute piece all using cut paper style in Procreate, and then edited my film together in Final Cut Pro. So the final piece looks like I had cut paper out, but it was entirely just using this program. I can show that to you as well. Cool trick. I don't know if you guys have shared this in your awesome Procreate tips yet, but a really cool trick if you're trying to make your digital work look like physical media is to make your background layer a high-res photo of like watercolor paper or some textured paper. I do this all the time in Procreate. You get a really cool effect because Procreate has so many wonderful brushes and washes and textured tools innate to the program and that you can download from third parties. And by making your background layer a beautiful photo of textured paper, and if you change the opacity on any layers above it and it works for your animation, the image looks to just blend in with the texture of the paper. It looks like it's been done on paper. Really cool little trick. So what I'm going to do here in just a next couple of minutes is show you just adding layers of to group. So I'm on my first, my bottom layer, my first layer of animation illustration here. I'm going to add a layer, and I am going to tap that layer, and it's going to bring up a left-hand menu. At the very bottom, it says that you can combine down. Combine down will group. Merge down will blend them as one layer. It will just lock all the images onto one. Combine down is your grouper, and combine down is your best friend. So combine down now, rather than just having my layer 2, now I've got a new group, and that entire group is going to become my first frame. And so when I'm making these animations, I just keep taking passes, and the way that I'm building this animation is the same way I built the samples that I was showing you earlier. I start just by doing my highlight, and then I start to create groups on each of my layers, and I keep making passes and adding elements in groups so that I'm not doing anything destructive to the work that I've already done. And so I can order and relayer within the group to discover interesting things. And so I'm layering on top of this white. This is this kind of niche stuff I've been playing with here. Let's see how this goes. I'll go back to my airbrush and bring down my opacity. So I'm working in my very first layer that is now a group on the blank, and I'm going to give myself a place. And I have no idea how this is all gonna come together, but that's kind of the fun of the discovery. So I'm gonna just keep going and doing that same thing again and again, combining down on my blank layer, adding a wash of blue, just being really free with it. That fun discovery that I know all you amazing painters totally get when you start to add in that next layer and you're like, what? So You can test what you're doing really easily. It's starting to look pretty wild. Oh, I'm just catching up on chat. I'm so sorry that I hadn't been on that. Catching up now. Yeah, I'm glad that you guys are here, even if you're not able to follow along right now on Procreate. I'm so stoked just to have your presence here and share some awesome motion stuff. And I want to make myself totally available to you guys too. I love this community and I really love the skill sharing that happens here. So if you want to dig any deeper, reach out to me. I'm happy to send you resources. And if you're interested in going really deep and you'd like to dissect my project file, I'm happy to email you the Procreate file. That can be a really great way to get in and learn. I've trained assistants on projects that way, just giving them a file and letting them dissect. So if you would like it, just DM me and I'll send you whatever, and I can point you in some more cool directions if this is something that excites you. I know we've only got a few more minutes here, but I just encourage you to play with the layers. And the same, I would just keep going from this point. I'm probably just gonna keep layering, and maybe my next layer, I'm gonna try to make a little bit of a motion layer. And if you wanna play with basic motion, just try it out. I'm gonna pick like a totally different color and some totally different brush. Sure, flowers. What does that look like? Okay, cool. So here's what I'm gonna do. I've got 5 frames. I'm gonna just move this flower around, starting on my first frame group, adding a new layer onto the top. I'm gonna say I have a flower that starts there. Next group up, add a layer. The flower's gonna move to the right. Next layer in the next group. Flower's gonna be there. All right, what did that do? Whoa, looks crazy. I might slow down my frames per second for that. Five frames is not a lot of frames to achieve any kind of smooth motion, but you can start to see the potential here. Sometimes I like to replace my background, my reference layers as I go. So say I'm done pulling out all of my highlights from my self-portrait, and now what I really want is a reference of like a, for example, a circle to make a halo. That's how I went about doing this piece here. You can see similarly, I had a reference photo in the background, but I also gave myself a reference circle as a background layer so that I could use it to create all of these little halo layers. So you can swap out your background reference photos, pop them in and pop them out as necessary. Delete them whenever you want. Here's what this piece looked like all together. So I would love to see what you all are doing. So I wanted to just take a minute to tell you about how, if you haven't done it yet, how you get your animations that we've set up for Zoom, if you want to put them as your little screensaver in Zoom. If you haven't done this yet, pretty fun. When I'm sitting here and I'm animating on the train, I am working on my iPad and I am broadcasting Zoom from my laptop. So when I finish an animation, I export it directly to my computer with AirDrop, and then I go right into the Zoom app and choose it as my virtual background from the files on my computer. And so you can too. So you have options in terms of how you export, the same way that you do with a still image. So I know that you're probably still working, but so I can respect my time here. I've got a couple minutes, and I'll just show you how I would go about exporting this for different things.
There's no rush if you need to take longer time.
Okay. Well, here, I'll make sure that I've got it complete for anyone who is expecting an hour, and then I'll be here all week. Thank you very much, Veronica. This is really fun. And please, I'd be more than happy to answer questions and stuff afterwards too, if you wanted to make time for that, or I can take it off to another platform too. But so I'll share with you. So this is just what I've done in this time, and this is fun, and I can absolutely continue on from here, and I probably will, so that I'll share with you how this evolves throughout the day after more passes. So you can see just like where it can go after you get the basics. But I oftentimes like to export an animation as I go. I like keeping as many kind of archived versions of things as possible, and that comes from a lifetime of being a freelance designer working for clients, and you lose one project and you back up and make 99 copies of everything. So to export this, you have a lot of different options of how you can share in Procreate. And so the wrench up by gallery in the upper left, in the top menu there you have add, canvas, next canvas you have share. And so from your animation file, you can share a still image, you can share the Procreate file, you can share it as a PSD. If you exported this as a Photoshop file, it would just export as layers, just the same way a regular Procreate does. Or you can share the layers, and you can share it in any number of ways. So I export for Zoom, and I export for Instagram, and I export when I'm making films for clients as MP4. And MP4 will take each of your frames and convert that into a JPEG. That's how an MP4 is built. An MP4 is a series of JPEGs. So we could export it as an animated MP4. And when you select that, you have options again to change your frame rate or to change the amount of information that the file is being saved with. So it automatically is going to prompt your frames per second for however you have it set in your file. But if when you're looking at your preview here, you decide, you know, I want to just make this crazy, or it doesn't look right and I need it to be 2 frames a second or whatever, you can change that here. I would recommend exporting at max resolution because the programs that we're talking about, Instagram and Zoom, do their own kind of downsampling for you, but there are definitely times when you want to create a smaller file. WebReady will shrink it way down and make it tiny. But I would export as max resolution. When I say export, it gives me these options here, and I can export to my MacBook Pro using AirDrop. It's going out as an untitled file right now. I didn't actually export it. It's going out as an untitled file because I didn't title it in my gallery. It will take whatever your title is from your gallery here and use that as your file name. So I could change this to demo, and demo then would be the file name that would export with the film. Thank you so much for letting me share this, and I'm so enthusiastic about motion and teaching people this new way to just like free up and sketch and play. And I would love, love, love to see what you're doing and answer questions. And I'm on here all the time, and I'm really happy to have conversations about this app or about animating or whatever anytime. So Veronica, thank you so much. And yeah, happy for questions or whatever you'd like to do next. I might say, do you want me to leave my screen share up if there are questions, and then we could take the screen share off?
Hi, I have a question.
Yeah,
Hi. So I had a question. You said you loop the video after you're done animating because this will only be like 1 second. So
Yes.
once we loop it in another software, there's a quality drop. Because
Right.
even I animate, right? I try to make small animations out of my illustrations. I've been doing that. And I noticed this quality drop once we try to loop it in any other software. So what do you do about that?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Thank you so much. Yes. So because I'm working right now, yeah, because this was such a quick demo and we only have 5 frames or whatever, that is like a fraction, it's a third of a second worth of animation. So if we were to continue and make more frames, we would be exporting a longer film, but the whole point of this is that it can be a really quick sketch and you don't have to. So what I do is I will export this, and again, it's only 5 frames. I export it as an MP4, and then I take it directly into iMovie. So if you have iMovie already on the device that you've got Procreate, typically, easy to pop it over, and in iMovie, you can add the, oh no, hi! You can, then you can add the film into the iMovie timeline, tap on the film in the iMovie timeline, or tap on the clip in the iMovie timeline, it highlights it in yellow, and it asks you if you'd like to duplicate, and you just say duplicate, 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 until you've got a long enough timeline. And yes, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I will do that on some of these that are too short even to import into Instagram. On these really quick ones, Instagram will be like, sorry, this 0.3 second film doesn't really work for us, jerk. And so I'll have to take it into iMovie and just do a quick duplicate on the clip, export it again, right out of iMovie. And then it will be high quality, because you can choose your output quality from iMovie. I oftentimes actually do it right in Final Cut Pro because it's somehow easier, but yeah. So I would say iMovie, because it's probably going to also be on your iPad if you're on an iPad. But it's true that some platforms just don't accept them when they're super short loops. However, Zoom totally does. Zoom would let you upload a 0.3 second animation and it loops it seamlessly. So all of the things that I play as I'm sitting here are really short. But Instagram might need you to, might need you to do that. So hey, for those who joined, yes, Veronica did. Hi, Veronica did record this, so I'm super excited that we get to share it. And I'm just answering questions here. If anyone else had other questions before I stop my screen share, and then I'll just keep drawing. And you're welcome to chat with me on the side, or DM me if you wanted me to email you resources. I'm stoked to do that too.
I'd actually like to see a couple more of your animations. This is delicious.
Oh, thank you. I would love to share. Would you like me just to kind of play? I can play through actually some of my files so that you can see them too. And I might just shut up and you can just watch them for a bit. Great. Yeah, these are really fun. Thank you. I'd love to share. And I can show you just some of the ones. Also, I can show you each of these that I've done as I've been practicing for this. I can show, this is an interesting one to show without the foreground or the background. You can see how kind of loose it was. Just a really, really simple speed value study, layer after layer, that with a foreground with some definition and a background with some definition creates a really poetic little vignette. I just love the way frames breathe. I love the effect of static motion. There's something in it that is so powerful. It's so theatrical, and it's really simple. It's so simple to do with these digital programs. I find that I learn so much, and I think theatrically as an animator, so I get why I'm drawn to this, but I think it unlocks something totally different, this motion dynamic. So I'll show you some other stuff here. This was a little test. I think I did this on one of Canon's trips the other day. Really basic. I have a background that's just locked in, that is just a value face, and then just some weird orbital stuff. Again, this is just a sketch, just kind of playing. I think this might have been during a breathwork session. This follows the exact same principle as the self-portrait, but I just worked quickly over a hand reference because I really like working with hands. I locked a background layer that is just a drawn texture. And then on my grouped layers, I've got some motion and some things that stay static, and just kind of playing around with like different texture and vibe. This is kind of next level from what, just the next step up from what you've just done, where I took reference photos of myself passing my hand over my face. And I knew that I wanted to make a 1 second loop. So I took 12 photos, and then I traced really quick contour lines over each of those photos. I imported each photo in and then dropped the photos out. That technique in animation is called rotoscoping. It's used in all sorts of animations. Part of Snow White is rotoscoped. Actually, when you watch Snow White, it's really interesting to see they've used 2 animation styles. And Snow White and the humans are like, or Snow White and the Prince, I think, are both rotoscoped. So they took film of actors and then frame by frame traced over to get their motion, but then the dwarves were all drawn straight ahead animation style with this squash and stretch, really different. So you can feel that when you're watching that old film, that they were playing with these 2 like unique ideas during early animation, and they were blending the 2. But so by referencing a photo and tracing over it, you're not just tracing, you're participating in an animation tradition. So that's how I achieved this motion here, was just rotoscope, still frames. You can also take video. There are multiple apps that you can use to take a video file, like take a video with your phone of, say, someone dancing, and then the app will break that video down into still frames. If you're trying to get a complex motion and you want to rotoscope it, you can pluck out individual frames from movies as well. But this one I did just for my own reference, so I took the photos. And again, layered. And so let's see.
That one was so beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so to speak to that, this is a great example of this. So many of you are familiar with the early works of Muybridge, early film studies and motion studies using cameras set up to capture like the gallop of a horse or the flap of a bird or a dancing woman. Muybridge's motion studies are just still frames that are loops, most of them. And if you want to play with this technique that I'm showing here, again, it's rotoscoping, and it's rotoscoping using still frames of a bird in flight that I found on the interwebs. I've used Muybridge's horses multiple times in multiple productions, actually, to get a horse gallop. I should share, I don't have that animation loaded, but I made a stop motion animation using projecting shadows on a wall of a horse that I think you'd find cool, but using this exact same technique, which is frame by frame following motion. And then, as you can see, I'm doing my same layering. Oh, I'll add a cloud, I'll add a whatever. So these are just my little studies. This is a straight ahead that I did. I was hosting a death cafe early in lockdown. I was moved to go live on Instagram and just draw with people during a death cafe. And so I was reading poems about death, and then we were just drawing. And so this
The Death Cafe.
Death Cafe is a space to essentially talk about and honor death, and create a space where people are speaking openly and thoughtfully about the concept that death exists, more or less. I've been a part of a number of death cafes in person and online, and I'm really drawn to that type of community that just kind of sits together with the reality of mortality. Yeah, so this was a piece from one of my death cafes. I believe I was reading some David Whyte poetry on this day, And I just went ahead and I just kept drawing. I didn't test it. I didn't test it. I just kept drawing, and I made so many layers. I've got 51 layers here, but this is what that ended up looking like. I've got a thing for these little dancing ghosts. So that flame is just it's just one of the brushes in Procreate. And so again, this was just speed. I was just interested in speed and going with the feeling. I've developed a technique that I call somatic animation, and it's a way to sort of try to work really immediately to convey a felt sense of something. And you can see how working quickly somehow creates an emotional sense almost faster than you might if you were really belaboring the point. There's something about these haunted little ghost figures that say so much, and they were so quick. You know, this is really a cool way to unlock like new subliminal kind of stuff in your work. I hadn't even discovered this little character until I started doing these pieces. There's another ghost. I did this as a square format because I knew the output was going to be my main story feed on Instagram. I just love this little guy. Again, this is playing with textures and all of the different pens, and this was a straight ahead animation. It's no grouping, no planning. This was just me feeling.
Was this, you took the water paper technique you're talking about?
Great question. No, this is actually, that's just one of the charcoal, I think it's one of the pastel pencils that is innate to the program. Although I do have a lot of pencils, or brushes rather, loaded that I've gotten from other sources. So sometimes I forget. One of the really neat things about animation that I love is when you see all of the frames all up at once. I just love this view. Something really exciting about that to me. So I've got a lot of my test animations on here, but I would love to share some of my work that I plan.
These are so powerful. Thank you. I would love it if you would host a death cafe here on the train. I think that's a conversation that's very timely.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. I am hoping to get trained, conductor training soon. I'm queuing for that because I'm really moved to share that as well. And you know, I was offering it on Instagram as a creative death cafe, but a lot of the people that were connected with me weren't artists. So it was like a lot of people kind of there with me, but not drawing. But I would be so excited to share this with people who wanted to make work in this way. I just find it really freeing, and I do so much highly planned work as a person who takes commissions in animation. I have to be really thoughtful. I have to do a lot of math, and I do a lot of sit down and plan it out front to back work. And this is sort of the antidote for me. This is where I do all my discovery and find out just like how expressive this medium can be.
Hi, I have another question.
Yeah.
I was just intrigued about what you were talking about, the Death Cafe. I don't know about it, but it just sounded interesting. So could you elaborate about that? Could you just tell me what it is?
Oh, a Death Cafe?
Yeah.
Yeah, essentially it's just a group of people coming together, almost like in a salon format, almost, just a group setting where you come together, and essentially the idea is to hold space for and talk about, often in some kind of constructive way, the concept that that death is certain and that to live is to die, and just to work with that as a conscious bit of knowing is, I think, maybe the basic way to sum up a death cafe. And for me, my personal practice was to make a space where we could share poetry or writings about death or different kind of prompts or concepts, and then go take that as a launching place into some artwork while listening to maybe some other informative content, and then sharing at the end kind of what came through that way. So it's kind of a cross-pollination